The New York Times did a massive hit piece this weekend on the police. The article, entitled "Why Many Police Traffic Stops Turn Deadly," argued that police cross the line during traffic incidents based on a fear of danger on the part of the police officers. The article highlighted fatal traffic stops over the last 5 years where drivers or passengers who were not wielding a gun or a knife were fatally shot by police. And it is filled with loaded language and skewed statistics. For example, they want to make sure you know it was the officer's fault for pulling these cars over at all. Quote, "Many stops began with common traffic violations like broken taillights or running a red light." Yeah, that is exactly how officers every day stop or discover more significant crimes. Continues, "Motorists were often resistant or evasive. Some had been hiding illegal drugs or weapons. Others had outstanding warrants." And then that more than 3/4 of the unarmed motorists were killed while attempting to flee. Now, the Times asserted that this is all proof of a failed justice system when it comes to cops. The recurrence of such cases and the rarity of convictions both follow from an overstatement ingrained in court precedents and police culture of the danger that vehicle stops pose to officers, claiming a sense of mortal peril. So it is the officers' fault that they risk their lives every day and fear getting their heads blown off by bad guys. The article goes on to say, quote, "In case after case, officers said they had feared for their lives, and in case after case, prosecutors declared the killings of unarmed motorists legally justifiable." The Times reviewed video and audio recordings, prosecutor statements, court documents finding patterns of questionable police conduct that went beyond recent high-profile deaths of unarmed drivers. First of all, the New York Times assessment of questionable police conduct should never mean that someone gets convicted of a crime. Now, let me pause here for a second and be clear. There are cases of police misconduct that do not make national headlines. They are real and they are problematic. Cops should not shoot at a fleeing suspect. There are some bad players out there, and there are cops who go too far, and they should be held accountable. But when the Times places the blame on the cops in this way, you know it's a hit job. Quote, "Officers regularly and unnecessarily place themselves in danger by standing in front of fleeing vehicles or reaching inside car windows, then fired their weapons in what they later said was self-defense." You know, the last time I checked, when an officer stands in front of a car, whether it's good policy or not, he or she should not expect to get run over. The piece analyzed all fatal incidents in the last 5 years, starting by pointing out that police have killed more than 5,000 civilians this year, but then broke down those deaths. They said, quote, "Many died during felonies in progress, home invasions, domestic violence, calls, or shootouts in the streets." No recognition of the heroism involved in some of those situations. The article repeatedly talked about how statistically safe traffic stops are for officers, and then offered anecdotes about people killed by police. But not once did they offer anecdotes with details on the other side about the officers who were murdered or wounded during a routine traffic stop. According to the FBI, officers killed in the line of duty has increased 51% this year compared to last year, but that didn't quite fit with the narrative. Join us now is one of the experts interviewed in the New York Times article, Michael Gennaco, who is a recognized expert on law enforcement and reform, as well as accountability. Thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it. I want to discuss what you were quoted saying in the article, and I want to make sure that you feel the context was appropriate, et cetera. You were quoted saying prosecutors and courts give more leeway to officers' decisions to use force at vehicle stops as a result of the exaggerated concern about the potential for officers getting hurt. Why do you use the word exaggerated concern?
I think that because of the way in which officers are exposed to the information about the safety or lack thereof of traffic stops, it does exaggerate the concern about there is a real concern. Every traffic stop has some potential risk. But I think that some of the training and some of the briefings that officers are exposed to does exaggerate that concern.
Well, but would you say the same thing, for example, about pilots, right? When they're trained about a possible crash, et cetera, they're trained on sort of worst case scenarios, right? They're trained to protect their lives, to save their lives, et cetera. And I would think it's good policy on the part of police training to warn rookie officers, et cetera, there's a real danger. Every time you pull over a vehicle, you don't know exactly what's going to happen. And in particular, when you want to train them for potential conflict as well, and sure, de-escalation is the goal, but this notion that somehow, and I have to tell you, I was particularly bothered, not at you, at the New York Times, when they said many of the fatal vehicle stops reviewed by the Times unfolded in a similar way. Officers acted as if their lives were in constant peril and killed drivers who failed to obey orders. They acted as if their lives were in constant peril. Well, when someone is not obeying orders in a traffic stop, it can get ugly and it can make you very nervous as a police officer, no?
Absolutely. There is no question that that's one of the indicia that officers definitely need to be aware of. And if somebody is not going with the program or slow to go to the program, that should heighten the threat and concern of any officer approaching a vehicle. The question then is, what do you do about it? And consistent with that, just in the same way that pilots are trained to perform safely, officers should also be trained in the same way. So for example, when that happens, the last thing an officer should be doing is reaching into a vehicle, because that only increases the potential danger to that officer. So I'm not suggesting that officers should be aware of their surroundings and should be aware of how any individual is responding to them or not as part of that calculus. The question is,
but I think
then is, what do you do about it?
Right. I think that's fair to say that, officers should be trained in a particular way, trained not to shoot at a fleeing suspect, et cetera, of course. But when it comes to something like putting your hand in a window, et cetera, when you're there and it's happening in real time and you're nervous and someone's not obeying your orders and you're afraid of what they may do next, the Times seems to be suggesting these people should all be prosecuted for murder because it ended up in someone dying. And I think that just ignores the reality of being a police officer having to make split-second decisions.
Prosecution is sort of the nuclear option here with regard to officers who are trained and required to wear a weapon in order to do their job. They've got that gun strapped onto their hip every day, and they have to. That being said, there are other options that are available and sometimes go unheeded with regard to additional training or a discipline. Sometimes officers just don't have the right kind of level of confidence to continue to do their job. But taking freedom away from them in a prosecution, I think that's appropriately reserved for the rare case.
So would you agree with me then that the Times's call, and it was numerous times in the article, for this notion that, these people aren't being prosecuted, look at how few cases are being prosecuted, et cetera, was overkill on the part of the New York Times?
I wouldn't go that far. I'm just saying that I as an expert and a former prosecutor of police officers, by the way, agree that it's a rare case in which the prosecutor standard is met.
Were you bothered by the article? I mean, when you looked at it in its totality, did you say you think this is a fair portrayal?
I think the article makes some good and valid points. And I think the whole data thing is a real problem because here's the thing. Because the data is so insufficient on a granular and on a global scale, the media outlets, including the New York Times, Washington Post, and others, have had to fill in that gap. And that's unfortunate.
Well, that's true, but what I was concerned about is not the data. The Washington Post has an ongoing, database now of police shootings, and people can interpret it in different ways, et cetera. I was bothered by the way that the New York Times claimed to have seen all this information and claimed to then draw these conclusions about what should or shouldn't be done implicitly. I mean, this was an article that was calling for the prosecution of more police officers. There was no way to view it any other way. And And again, as I said at the outset, that's okay if you've got the evidence in specific cases to say this was overwhelming, et cetera. But they're drawing these grand conclusions about hundreds of cops out there who, in effect, ought to have been prosecuted. And you seem to agree with me that that is the nuclear option and that we need to be very, very careful when talking about prosecuting cops. You get the final word.
Of course. And I think that that option is and should be available. And I do think that there are times in which the evidence has been there, or lesser kinds of prosecutions, and short of murder, like involuntary manslaughter, are often, those levers are often not pushed in the right case. But there needs to be a balance, clearly.
Well, and again, I would argue even for involuntary manslaughter, the standard better be pretty darn high in terms of when you're going to prosecute a cop. But again, I think we all believe in accountability because it's good for the cops, it's good for the communities when there is behavior that is egregious. But I think that anyone who goes out there and reads this article from the New York Times fairly and carefully, when they say things like officers acted as if their lives were in constant peril, as if these officers are faking it, will tell you that it is not a fair portrayal, I don't think, of what is happening with policing in America. But I appreciate, look, you've been nuanced about this. You've been intellectually consistent, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. And to the good of the New York Times, at least it has furthered this very important discussion, and I appreciate your views.
Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.